Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Art Business Podcast. I aim to do these every 2 weeks. Sometimes there's larger gaps. This time, actually, there's going to be a smaller gap because my previous guest, Andrei Jeska, was an alumnus who has a gallery in Romania and had shown a great artist in the Venice Biennale that I managed to see. I'm going out there again next week with the students. I believe my guest today, Aparajita Jain.
Yes, please.
Are you, when you said you're going to Italy before we started recording, do you mean Venice?
So I was at Venice or in
Yes.
Venice for
Yeah,
the opening.
the opening,
I
of course
was
you would have
there
been.
for the preview because it's so hard to keep yourself away. There is so much FOMO associated with not being there for a lovely opening in a absolutely stunning city. So I was there, and I'm happy to share some thoughts about it later,
Yeah.
maybe the conversation.
Anyway, to properly introduce you, and we'll learn a lot more about you as we go, obviously. But basically, Aparajita Jain has an established gallery based in I think Mumbai and Delhi, if I'm right. We can talk about that later. Called with the beautiful name Nature Morte. I don't know,
Yes,
which is, pardon my French, which obviously to me is still life.
it is still life.
Or
That's how
yeah.
it came along. That's how Peter thought of it.
It's a great name. So you're very welcome, Jane, and thanks for giving up some time for this recording.
Thank you so much for having me, David. It's really quite an honor because, like I mentioned to you before, my daughter studies at the Institute in New York, and we're so grateful that a program like this exists and that there is so many academics who are sort of interested and dedicated to raising the next generation of art professionals or art enthusiasts.
That's great.
Maybe all
Yeah.
of them may not become professionals, but as long as they enjoy it and the world might be a slightly more beautiful place, I think it's worth
Yeah.
it.
No, thank you for that, Aparajita. So your daughter's studying in New York. We were even talking about that she's also already started like buying works on paper by post-impressionists. It's great.
Yeah, she has. And I think that's the strength of the program or the strength of the introduction to the world of art and to the world of thought and to the world of analyzing data. There's data is for free now. It's
Yeah,
about how we process that data. And
absolutely.
I think that's what she has learned quite quickly on.
That's great. That's great because the program. This is just for the listeners, just to remind you, those of you who aren't my alumni or current students. I'm the program director of a master's degree in art business at Sotheby's Institute of Art in London. Aparajita's daughter is studying the same course in New York, which I helped to set up many years ago now. But the reason it was the program was started is quite interesting. Sotheby's auction house that used to own our company. Now it's complicated, but we're now actually run by someone else, but we've retained the Sotheby's Auction House brand name, which is great. They wanted a course that bridged art history students into art business. So they were saying to me, David, we get these amazing art historians with PhDs from the Cultural Institute and so on, but they know nothing about business and the language of business. So can you create an MA that bridges, and that is still what we're doing a lot of the time. We get a lot of applicants who know a lot about art, but they need to understand the terminology and the methodology of the business world. So that's kind of where that grew from, if you like.
And it is beautiful because that's one of the things we experience from being a business owner is when we're looking for highly trained professionals,
Mhm,
we have to either choose between the academics
mhm.
or the financial brain. But
Absolutely.
the person who has both is hard
Yes,
to come by. And
exactly.
often they come from the institute. And I'm hoping that there are more and more children or young adults who want to enroll themselves because really the art world needs skilled professionals and
Yeah.
professionals who understand. Because the truth is, while we want to distance ourselves from the money of art, we can't.
Yeah, and that was the issue, is that academic art history, certainly in this country, and I believe in generally in the rest of the world, certainly in the West, traditionally they hate talking about money. They don't think that the financial business aspects of artistic production and consumption are anything to do with understanding art. We totally disagree with that. We think that you've actually almost cruelly removed a fundamental aspect of the production and consumption of art?
I mean, because I think, even when you want to understand museums and how shows happen, the truth is everything needs a budget and needs funding. And
Yeah.
that money needs to come from somewhere. And therefore, there has to be budgetary planning.
Hmm.
While I would love to not ever talk about money in the entire realm of the art process, the truth is it's important because all artists are ultimately human beings and all human beings need money to survive.
Absolutely. Think of cases, historical cases like Vincent. You know, his
And
brother
so I
was trying to sell his works. He was ahead of his time. We all know the story. But people do need money unless they're incredibly privileged, in which case you're very lucky. But the artists I know and I support are very often struggling, and we try to support them on our programs as well. Anyway, starting with the typical desert islandess questions, Aparajita. Can you tell us what your favorite city is? It's a difficult question, and
No, it's not so difficult for me. I think my favorite city, hands down, is New York. I'm sorry I'm saying that to a Londoner, but
no,
I
no,
love
no.
the city of New York. I
Yeah,
think
I
it's got
agree
a
with you.
mix of culture and finance, and it's just I somehow always thought that New York was the the beginning of a dream or the goal of a dream, and it always remains that for me. So New York, hands down, for me, is my favorite city in the whole world.
I love what you say about it because we've had other guests who said New York, obviously, well, kind of obviously, but I like the way you describe it as the start of a dream. It still feels like that, doesn't it? Particularly if you go and meet New Yorkers and you've got this sense of that, today's a new day and it's very entrepreneurial. There's all the people are very hopeful in my experience.
Exactly. For me, that the energy of hope
Yeah,
is sort of so pervading and so prevalent
yeah,
that each person is literally there trying to make it or has made it
yeah.
and has something. It's what dreams are made of, I feel.
Absolutely. And I mean, I remember going out there 6 months after 9/11, the great tragedy of the Twin Towers. And it was incredible how resilient people were. And now when you go there, it's just, again, that's a symbol of hope. Daniel Liebeskin's wonderful fountains and structures, it's absolutely tremendous, I think.
They have a way of converting grief and despair to hope and resilience,
Hmm.
which is all not fair always because that's testing people in community constantly.
Yeah.
But that's what they do with it, and that's similar to a city that I grew up in called Mumbai.
Yes.
And I feel the same kind of resilience and hope in that city. But of course, New York is New York and has a lot more to offer, and hence always very
I
charming.
I guess I think probably what we're agreeing on, Aparajita, is that any big city, if you receive it properly on your own radar, there is a sense of hope, and because I remember I was listening to an India cricket match a few months ago, and they were talking. I can't remember the name of the guy now. You may or may not be interested in cricket, but they were saying how he had lived on the streets of Mumbai, I think it was, and it's now this amazing cricketer who's a star with everyone incredibly well paid. So it strikes me, and it strikes me that this happens in all cities have this sense of energy.
I think actually, I don't think all cities have that sense of energy, but I think many cities have that sense of energy.
Yeah,
And those cities that have it are like magnets and they pull people who are
yeah.
tenacious and who have the ability to sort of bear pain and disappointment and whose
You have to.
resilience
Yeah,
kind of overcomes that and
yeah.
are able to make it. And I think it's quite amazing. So yes, New
Yeah.
York hands down.
I think London does as well, obviously. And, I think our
That's
students learn that by staying here for a year and staying in New York for a year. There is a sense of hopefulness and resilience, I think. Anyway, the next question is almost like the binary opposite, which is, do you have some kind of place where you go outside of cities, which maybe a countryside or beach location or mountain location that you really love?
I do love the mountains up in the Himalayas in
Oh,
India.
wow.
I unfortunately don't get to go there as much as I'd like to.
Mm.
The newest place that I have found as a place of peace and retreat is actually a wildlife sanctuary. I like the exact opposite of man-made. It's like is the antithesis to the man-made. And
And
it's
may I ask, is the place are you referring to a specific place? And if you are, was it was it natural or was it created as a new
I
space
go
for
for
urban twins?
we've started going to national parks. Well,
Mm.
the Indian version of national parks, which are protected sanctuaries, which are natural forests
Yeah,
that are protected for some wildlife, perhaps.
yeah,
And we're trying to discover as many as we can. But
yeah.
even 2.5 or 3 days gives it's like a sorbet for my mind. And it's a stark sort of wake up call to a larger, more pervading reality of
That's
existence.
that's so poetically put. How wonderful a sorbet for your mind. That's great. I might reuse that myself. We just had the Chelsea Flower Show, which is very world
Yes.
famous, of course, in London. And the winner was significantly a garden that was that was using a lot of wild plants that never used to be in Chelsea. You know, everything's about wilderness plants now, and it was also about forest bathing. So it
That's
was really great. It surprised a lot of people that it won it. You know.
But it makes sense. We're losing forests, we're losing nature.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, we are in Delhi, we are feeling global warming.
Oh,
It,
and here,
it's
you know,
60 degrees
yep, everywhere. It's awful.
hot. And
Yep,
so there is entire the heat is global warming is here, and we have each one of us has contributed to it.
yep.
And hence there is an understanding of the fact that we need nature. And so that's what's happening. We're retreating. I'm enjoying my retreats there.
Great. That's fun. That's fantastic. And do you have a favorite building, a piece of architecture that, you know, you
I'm
particularly love?
well, I was just thinking I mean I like many buildings. I might
Mm.
not always know who has made them, but what I've really enjoyed in the recent past is Pinot's the I don't know how to say it properly, but the Bourse in
Oh,
Paris,
yes. Yeah, I still haven't been there.
which is a older building
Yeah.
with Tadao who has retrofitted. And I thought that was magical. I
Mm.
went to Antilocost a few years ago, and to me, the pavilion there was spectacular.
Mm.
Closer home, there is a structure or a museum stroke institution that's been made by Sangeeta Jindal at a place called Hampi, which is
Hmm.
outstandingly beautiful. So there are many buildings, but I do enjoy the use of local material and the fact that something has to be nuanced in the environment it's at, rather than picking up what works in even a New York to, like, let's say Delhi. I am now becoming a little bit more sensitive to the fact that buildings and architecture has to respond to where it's inset. And if it's not, there should be a good reason why. And I think green and I think it matters. So I mean, I do enjoy architecture. Unfortunately, I simply don't know enough about it in terms of, but I really do enjoy it a lot.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because we usually the name of an artist when we're looking at traditional fine art, historical or contemporary, is so important to, if you like,
Yes.
as a brand. But architects seem to get sidelined. You know, they don't have a big signature on the building, and you have to look it up. It's quite
Uh,
different.
it's actually unfortunate because a lot of these buildings are pieces of art.
Mm,
And I mean, the truth is that Indian art was architecture to
yes,
begin with.
yes, absolutely.
Our oldest, I mean, after cave paintings or after murals, it was architecture. That's been a big gift to the world. And so, and most of the architects' names, we wouldn't know who they are.
Mm,
So it is, I do agree. I wish there was a way that it was more, I wish there was a way of it being more defining, but it's
mhm.
not. I hope somebody changes that.
Yeah, brilliant. And music. What kind of music do you
Oh,
favor?
I'm obsessed with music. I have a wide variety. I enjoy Western classical to easy listening Western. I enjoy house music. And now I've started enjoying contemporary Indian music, which is a fusion between classical and contemporary. We have a lot of the industry in India is growing of contemporary music. And I enjoy pretty much, except hip hop, everything.
Okay, that's good. And my only exposure to Indian music, actually, I've in London over the years, I've been to see some really amazing classical Indian
Hmm.
musicians. I never saw Ravi Shankar. I've seen Amanda Shankar, his daughter, and she was on recently, and I think she is doing this contemporary
Yes,
classical
and
fusion.
I think that's a great shift for classical music because that's what's resonating with the younger generation.
Absolutely,
So we
yeah.
have to move and we have to draw them in with what they understand, after which they begin to understand the importance of the classical.
I think
But
it's a
I
very
think,
good way. Yeah.
but I think contemporary is important.
I think it's a really good way of putting it that ease in. One doesn't want to be patronizing, but I think you've put it very well that you get into things that have a little bit of classical in, and then oh, I quite like that, And you might remember that I think certainly in the early millennium, DJs started mixing in like polyphonic singing music by Thomas Tallis and Palestrina into their kind of trance music.
Exactly. And that's what took people back. And that's when they suddenly discover it. We cannot blame people for not enjoying what they don't know. It's
Absolutely.
it
Yes.
exists.
Yes, well put. And this is the really difficult one for someone like you. If so, this is the Desert Island Disc thing that is on the BBC every week, and sometimes has artists, and I love it because they basically have said if you had to take, like in this case, a work of art to a desert island one, what would it be?
Oh, wow.
You don't want to offend your artists, which we'll talk about later.
Yes. What would it be? So I would have to own one. I mean, I began my love for art with actually Monet. That's what I was obsessed with water lilies, and I saw it as a young girl on a small TV screen in my school when I was all of 13 or 14. And it stuck to me, and that's what drew me in. And I wanted to know more. And then, when I witnessed it in person, I fell in love with it more. And it's always my ode to my entire life in a way, because for me, my art journey is my expression of my life. And so if I owned it, that would be the work. But if there's a physical work that I own personally, I have a beautiful abstract. Actually, it's a really difficult question.
It is.
Somebody's gonna kill me about
I
this.
think I think it's we'll talk about your current artistic taste as a gallery later in a moment. But I think the Nymphaeus, the water lilies by Monet. I mean, I totally agree with you. I've seen there's lots of them as we all know. I remember seeing them in the old Orangery in Paris,
That's my point at
and
the orange again. Yeah,
yeah,
and I
and yeah, and of course they're big hits on the art market. He did a lot of them, as we know, and so they're very interesting to me as well from through an art market perspective. But also, I remember the first day that Tate Modern opened in London in the summer of 2000. I went the opening day and took my students, and and they had this. This was new at the time. Tate had controversially decided to be synchronic in its displays. So it was showing works from different periods of its collection. So in the first room they had a section called landscape at that point. It was one of the themes, deliberately and ironically, a traditional art historical genre, landscape. And in the first room, they had a Monet water lilies that they owned, which was one of the earliest works that Tate Modern own, impressionist,
yeah.
post-impressionist. But on the ground, they had a Richard Long earth art installation.
Wow.
The great, I think, great British, still living earth artist. So that was amazing, and they were letting these works across history speak to one another.
But I think it's important. I think that we are not we're not independent of another. And we're surely uh when I sit here today, I have a lot of direct ancestry to thank for genetically, as well as all that has been done before me to have me here. And that goes for community, country, civilization at large. So I don't feel like I am independent of the whole. And Monet and Richard Long, it's amazing that somebody thought of putting it together, but then it makes sense.
Yeah.
And, we had Richard Long in our sculpture park, I think a few years ago. And then it went to the Rijks. It was displayed at the Rijks last year. And we don't work with Richard Long regularly, but this is part of our nonprofit that we worked. And he was inset, or his work was inset in an old fort in a palace built by a Maharaja with no context to Richard Long or to now. And it doesn't matter. It was beautiful. It made so much sense. And there is something about continuity. So I think that it is beautiful that when we mix things up and we make people think about that we have so many people to thank, and we're all links in a large chain, that we have to be responsible for the other as well.
Yeah, no, it's lovely way of putting it. And you referred just then. You referred also to your what you've inherited and your kind of DNA, if you like. So I don't know if you could give us a little bit of information about your educational background and maybe even something to do with your family, if you want. And how has your upbringing, if you like, and your education informed your subsequent career in the art world?
So I studied, I was born in Calcutta, and then I grew up in Mumbai. I studied there. And I think I always say this, it's my grandmother who really started my interest in the arts. And I say beyond fine art, but music and literature and performance. And multilingually, she would expose us to poetry, for example. And then at school in Mumbai, my principal, we used to have a class on art appreciation. It wasn't graded, it was something that we had to do. And she repeated to us every week at how art made us human and how the arts made it worth living. And so we studied with her more from a passion point of view than a grading point of view, which made it very easy and more learning. And then I think as life grew on, I studied psychology. And then, I just did an undergrad. I never had any formal training in art. I did many courses along my journey. And then I think my art learning comes a lot from my partner, Peter, who is really my mentor and has taught me a lot as we moved on. And, seeing art through his eyes and his understanding. And Nature Mort has begun by him in New York. And then he opened it in India. And I became his partner only 12 years ago. But Nature Mort is 28 years old. So my family has nothing to do with the arts in a direct sense. My parents' family manufacture glass and different kinds of glass and other ancillaries. My husband runs a family office now. We're all business people. No, I'm the only art person in the family, and my grandmother started collecting in the family.
By the way, just in terms of semantics, when you said partner, I assumed you meant like husband, lover.
Husband. Oh no, 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 no.
So Peter is not
Yes.
yeah. I'm only saying that because I think other people might get that.
I get confused. Yeah. So Peter is um
Your
he
business
managed
partner.
is my business partner,
Yeah.
and my life partner is my husband, who is
Yeah.
as he now enjoys buying art a lot, but otherwise no I mean has no other art interest.
Well, but that is the way life is. And some of my students go on to become like, for better or worse, like art advisors, and the people who employ them, they love showing art in their home, but they don't have the time because of their main job. So they don't have the time to really explore it. So they rely on my students' knowledge to fill them in on that.
There are professionals for everything, right, David? We go to a doctor when we need to get cured, or when we go to therapy. We just go to professionals for everything. So why do people assume that art is to be so easily understood? I understand it's a visual medium and everybody has the absolute right to have a response, and they should own their response. However, and the act of buying or investing in art, that is a skill, and skill that needs education, information, data, etc., etc. So just because I like something doesn't mean it's going to go up in value or it's relevant or important. There are there are many layers and levels in this. So I do think people should have art advisors, or they should trust somebody, a gallerist or somebody, but it can't be something that is not being managed correctly.
Yeah, and the I do a lecture sometimes on collecting, and I begin with the Latin word colligere, which means to collect, but it also has semantic under meanings of to collect rationally, to know what you're doing, not to just collect anything, but to actually have a
Exactly.
reason behind it, you
But
know.
to have intentional collecting. And I
Mm,
think that it's okay if people don't want to be intentional, but then as long as they're really clear that that amount of money might just be written off entirely, or
mhm.
that when somebody looks at it and says, "What is this?" then they have to be okay with those responses and
Absolutely.
consequences. So
Yeah,
I often tell people, because we hear this a lot, that, I don't like it. I said, I understand, but often liking is about visibility and awareness. The more we see something, the more comfortable we become with it. And the more it goes into our unconscious mind as something as recognizable. And the more recognizable something is, the easier it is to have it around you. So it's like
absolutely. Mm.
it's that Mona Lisa effect. It
And
becomes
the
invaluable.
sorry, and a gallerist like yourself, I've experienced so often where I've taken a small group of students, maybe by personal tutees when we go abroad to an art fair, and you go around various stands if it's contemporary art fair, and I can see the students looking at the work and thinking, what's going on here? And then the moment you start talking to the gallerists and they start explaining a little bit about the artist's strategies and
Exactly.
mission, and
Makes sense.
suddenly that's when you start to like it. So it isn't always aesthetically obvious when you actually start looking at art.
In fact, I feel it's often that's the one thing that doesn't come up. I think the aesthetic pleasure in something that's contemporary takes a little while to become aesthetically pleasing. The majority of the time, I see that people are extremely uncomfortable about how contemporary art is aesthetically presented. And it's only when they understand the narrative and they see it more and more and more, do they see the value in that expression. And then it becomes aesthetically pleasing. But it takes years for that visual to be shown, for people to get for people to think it's pleasing.
Yeah, it took me. I don't mind saying this. When I started on this program in because I came into the institute in 2000 as an art historian and classical archaeologist, teaching people in a survey of Western art history. And the moment I moved across to the art business program and became director of that, it was a steep learning curve. I had to learn what I now realize is, I had no understanding of why some contemporary art, painted by living or created by living artists, is never going to get into a museum. It takes years. Took me several years before I began to understand why some artists are going to be in a museum, because they're intellectually satisfying and artistically satisfying in a very different way, maybe from a work of art in a regional gallery. I don't want to be snobby about this, but there's art and art, and there are people who want to buy art to decorate their houses, and they're not that worried about who it is and whether it has anything deeper in it. Do you get where I'm coming from? But it takes a lot. It took me a long time to distinguish what some people describe pejoratively as like wallpaper. I don't think that's necessarily, art has always been about decoration as well as art. Let's face it. Renaissance frescoes in
Yes,
palazzi,
absolutely. All decorative, or
Yeah.
or textile tapestry. I mean, I feel that what I like to say is there's decorative art,
Yep.
which may or may not land up in museums,
Yep. Good.
and there's intellectual art.
Yes.
But intellectual art has to be formally astounding as well,
Yep.
and it has to have content and repeated content. And that's what's going to get into a museum, perhaps, if what is being said is relevant to human history. I mean,
Absolutely.
ultimately, call it art history. It's an expressive documentation of human civilization,
Yep.
and so it matters. But often, when I think when an artist makes something to please another person's eye versus to please themselves, perhaps from the other point of view might be also understood as, um, I mean, I have artists who are working on things right now, and I'm like, but this is so different from what you've done. And what if people don't understand it? They said, we don't care. We do it because we like it. And this is what
Interesting.
we're doing now.
That's
And
interesting.
you realize that this is really, it's their own journey with their own lives, and they have something strong to say, and they're going to say it irrespective of whether somebody else is buying into it or not. And
Mm.
majority of the times it's those artists that make it.
Yeah, no, very, very interesting to hear that from your viewpoint, because there are some galleries who, of course, really, really kind of intimidate their artists to keep producing the stuff that sells, And I'm glad that you're not necessarily one of those.
I'm not going to judge anybody for that, because everybody's life situations are different, and we don't know
Absolutely.
what's making somebody make those decisions. I'm sure that my artists also feel some sort of pressure from me sometimes to repeat a few more times what is, when they reach a moment of absolute perfection that has everybody wants, that can kind of work. But the beauty of working with the ones that we work with is that they have very strong minds, and they say no quite easily. And
Interesting. Yeah. And
and
it's always been like that, hasn't it? It's always been like that. I mean, we in old mar we study old masters in my elective, and students who studied art history are often they didn't realize that there were lots of versions of a Van Dyck portrait, and and we teach them why that was. It isn't, and it doesn't mean that a later a copy by the same artist is any less culturally valuable than the original, because quite often there's reasons, that they're aristocrats in Great Britain want a portrait of the king or queen on their walls, and they want it to be by Van Dyck. So there's all those discussions also about originality.
I mean, the thing is, there is no one answer, unfortunately. I wish there was. But I think integrity to practice is underlies everything.
Yeah,
And I think that, I mean, that's why I think right now archiving is so important. And knowing, like, for example, one of the things is not knowing which was the original and which were, let's say, the studies
yeah,
to the main work.
yeah. It's all very, very interesting. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and
should,
what's the main work?
mm.
And why is
Does,
it the main?
we're going to talk more about your gallery in a moment, so we might talk about archiving and preserving the memory. But I just wanted to talk, perhaps to start in with more general questions about the international art market, which, from my viewpoint and from a lot of commentators' viewpoints, has been really volatile recently. Some auction resale prices haven't been so good, and um, in many segments, the art market doesn't seem to be growing. It seems to be quite stagnant. But when I look at India and hear what's coming out of India, it seems to be going relatively strong at the moment. And I wondered if you could explain from your viewpoint why that might be.
So I think it's just economics. And the truth is that India is at a point where the expectation of exponential growth, the metrics say there should be exponential growth. We just have the largest potentially purchasing economy in the world, 1.4 billion people, out of which a decent number will be a buying population. It's a young economy, not economy, it's a young civil, like a young people. So it's not an older population, it's a younger population. The kind of money that's coming into the country through foreign investments, etc., is staggering. Um, the addition of wealth in the smaller cities and the addition of wealth in down the chain is happening. So for example, and I will sound very elitist now, and apologies for that, but for example, my house help now, which is a standard thing in India to have, all have, of course, bank accounts. They all have, of course, mobile phones with a lot of data. They're able to use online payments, and they're able to buy things online. They're able to, many of them have air conditioning in their homes, which was entirely never imagined My chauffeur regularly goes on vacations with his children. I mean, we're looking at a difference in India that I'm experiencing in the last maybe even 6 years. The India has changed. The India that we knew is
That
no
that
longer the India.
that's really true, I would say, at the moment in, say, in London and the UK. Like a house help probably wouldn't be able to afford a lot of those things, or they can and they can't. But I guess it's all relative. But that says a lot about the Indian economy, sort of with the drip down process in the economy.
That's given that there's a drip down and the economy is growing. Also, the art market was very small to begin with. So
Hmm.
let's say I know that I think we're hovering around 65 billion in the world right now as the art market size.
The total, yeah, it's always been that, actually, around about that amount.
So and like let's say China is 11 billion
Yep,
or 12 billion, right?
yep,
India is maybe for 300, 400 million.
yep.
Now, if we just calculate the number of billionaires, millionaires, and the growing wealthy in India, the numbers don't match. And the
Yep.
only way the Indian art market is going to work is going upwards. So we have, let's say we don't even get 11 billion, but we get to five. That's still a
Hmm.
lot of.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And it'd
and
be interesting looking at the pie charts that we get in the Art Basel report every year to see whether India begins to take up more substantial parts of that pie.
I think it's going to take a few more years for that to
Yeah.
happen because, like I said, we're looking at China as 11 billion. I think, where is America right now? 14, 15?
I think I can't remember it immediately. It's some maybe around that or up to even 20. So basically, at the moment, I believe that USA is quite a lot ahead of the UK, followed by China. But China and the UK keep switching, have switched over the years in the new millennium. Obviously, I think the UK
Yeah.
is second at the moment, then China. And in Britain,
A
of course,
while
we're
ago,
worried about France, but nothing that much seems to be happening to threaten the London market at the moment from France. But watch this space.
would love to. I mean, I personally feel that this is a strong, unless there's a catastrophic incident,
Yep.
I can't see how this is not going to go upwards.
Yep. And our students learn all about. We tell them all the time, please do take an interest in the internet, in international politics and the news and the economy. Read the Financial Times, particularly the weekend one, which has a Melanie
Yes,
Gurlis writes for it. And it has a lot on the arts, obviously, how to collect it, how to spend it, rather. Rather controversial title for their magazine, but so it is so important because externalities can affect the art market, as we all know.
absolutely. So I do believe in the Indian art market. I do believe in the growth potentiality of this market. Of course,
Hmm.
nobody can confirm anything before it happens, but we're very hopeful.
Yep, and I certainly, that we spoke about before we started recording. We spoke about Anders Pettersson's art tactic, art forecaster, which is a game my students play to see if they get the final price at auction right. And there's that educates my students, if they're not otherwise focused on the Indian market, they begin to see these people. And the next question was about, is the market limited to the Indian modern masters like Amrita Sher, Gilraza and Gayondi, where there's been many recent records for those modern masters in the art market? But is there any suggestion that primary and secondary price contemporary artists are beginning to come up and mix with those modern masters?
So I think what we saw, I'm going to go back a little bit. So what we saw
Sure.
in 2008, where I felt there was a boom,
Yeah.
and it was contemporary that was going out of control at that time.
This is 2008. Sorry, yeah.
Pre-Lehman,
Sorry.
the years pre-Lehman collapse.
Yes,
So
yes,
like,
yeah.
you
So the
know,
summer of 2008, I remember it well.
yes, 2007 and 2008,
Yeah,
where things were heating up, and there was,
right at
you
the
know,
height.
yeah, it was. So it was the contemporary Indian art market that was um on fire.
Yeah,
And moderns were very low priced. And
yeah,
actually, that's not the correct way of, or that's not the right way of the growth in a market. Because unless we, the new has to grow on the old.
Yes.
And it's something that Catherine David told me, actually, who used to be the curator at the Centre Pompidou.
Yeah.
And she said to me that how can India not recognize her own moderns? And this is not the right way it's happening. The moderns have to be showcased first so that people understand where the contemporary is coming from. For world education to happen, for the larger narrative of conversation of where Indian contemporary art is coming from, we have to recognize her moderns. And so I feel like now the right thing is happening. However, there are simply, let's just look at Amrita Shergill that you mentioned. Now, the majority of Amrita Shergill's works are lying in a museum, which is the National Museum of Art in New Delhi. There are very, very, very few in circulation. And hence, it's like laying your hands on a Van Gogh or a Monet or a Da Vinci, because they simply don't exist in the free floating market. They are in museums, or if somebody's lucky enough to have them in their personal collections, they exist there. Nobody is letting go of something like this. And the people who generally bought it are well secured. I don't think they're waiting to liquidate a Da Vinci or a high value, scarce work to fund their lifestyle or their life. And so, like that, a lot of the moderns which are on fire right now, I think that the material will eventually exit the market. And therein will come the contemporary. Also, for many new buyers, large scale works are no longer purchasable. It's so expensive that they can't afford it. So they have to go to contemporary and buy larger scaled works of younger artists. So I think this is normal progression, impressionist, post-war, like, I mean, it just keeps going, right? So I think we're gonna come to the place where contemporary secondary will beat primary prices, but we have a little distance to go.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, as an example, I remember from my own experience, I remember in 2007 or 8, it probably was. I remember Sotheby's London Lot 1 in their big summer contemporary sale. It might have been 2008. I'd have to look it up, when the market really is at its height, before the famous Watershed Damien Hirst single owner sale, which was the day Lehman Brothers crashed. Just to remind everyone, in September, we were all watching it in this building on video live, you know. But I remember seeing a Batik elephant, sequined elephant, lying on the ground as lot number 1 in the Sotheby's Contemporary Show. And this was quite new, to bring in an Indian contemporary artist and introduce them to the market in a big way. And people were, you know, they were able to do that because the market was so confident.
And so I think we'll get there sooner than later. I know we'll get there. It's just about when. I don't know when.
Yeah, but I totally agree with you. There is a big discussion about our contemporary artists also need to be validated by the museum world, ideally.
And that's how. So really the focus right now is museums. And for example, we're coming to London for, well, Yorkshire, because Bharti Kher is opening one of our largest ever retrospectives at the Yorkshire Sculpture.
Right. Yeah.
And she had a beautiful sculpture unveiling at the Public Art Fund in New York a year and a half ago. So, things are happening for the bulk of my artists internationally and vis-a-vis museums. So I do feel that this is the way it should be. We should be building, museum connections for these artists. They should be visible to a larger audience. There should be, important critical writing on them. This is their time to work and grow. And this is the time for us to pour into them to grow. So I do think things are happening in the way that they should. As of now, not everything, but at least this one bit.
The metaphor that could be used for what you were saying about the modern masters and the younger generation artists is it's a biblical mythological trope, which is the grafting onto the old root of the new growth.
I think so. And I think it's important, right? I mean, we do have to acknowledge our ancestors.
I agree with that. My elective at the Institute on the market for antiquities and old masters, we now call it cross collecting, because we realise that contemporary art students can do it. You see, other students of our other MAs can take these, and we realise that what will attract them is the realisation that people who collect contemporary art should be encouraged to collect antiquities sometimes, and sometimes old masters or the national equivalent.
Yeah, but it's sometimes not available. And in a place like India, the
Yeah,
biggest problem is the influx of fakes and inauthentic art.
sure.
It's a big problem. And because there are not enough systems to validate the year on it, or to carbon date it, there are no estates, or very few estates that have deep archiving done. It's a bit of a it's a bit challenging.
Yeah, yeah, no, I get that, and that's another theme that we obviously look at in our course. And then Nature Mort has you spoke about this earlier that it's opened a. Oh no, we didn't speak about this, but as I understand it, it's opened a second location earlier this year in Mumbai, and this is in a new addition to your two. It's this pre-existing galleries in Delhi, so you've got a second gallery in Mumbai. Can you explain why you have the two in Delhi and the rationale for the new one in Mumbai?
So the two in Delhi, one serves as the exhibition space. The other one is essentially a viewing space
Hmm.
for smaller, younger shows. And
Hmm.
we have a lot of clients there. And, India is large enough to have two cities in which we can have galleries.
Hmm.
And Mumbai is my home base anyway, my emotional home base. So I was always desirous of doing something there. And so we opened in Jan. So technically, it's my third space. And I see Jaipur, the sculpture park, as my fourth space that we exhibit at, even though
Okay.
it's a non-profit and we don't sell anything out of there. uh, it's a space where, and not only our artists, but many other artists get viewed. But we're as passionate about it, if not more.
Yeah, yeah, and I thought in my experience, what used to be rather dull-eyed concept of a sculpture park, it was often not site specific. I think they've become, if I may use the word, the more sophisticated. There's a beautiful one I take my students to in Cornwall in southwest England outside of Penzance called Tremon here, and that is the guy who runs it, Neil Armstrong, who I must do a podcast with. He's equally interested in rare plants, and so it's in this beautiful setting. Cornwall's actually subtropical, so he brings in these plants from all over the world, and he brings in art sculpture from all over the world, and it's always placed within that natural landscape, so that the
Wow.
nature is actually kind of in a discourse, constant conversation with the art. I think that concept of the sculpture part that just used to be a place just to put works in, and that's that. I think that it's become much more sophisticated.
I mean, I think that for us, the reason why the sculpture park was because we wanted to do our little bit for public sculpture
That's the other
and
thing. It's
worship.
yeah,
We don't have very many museums in the country.
yeah,
And so we wanted to do something to expose our local um, our local population to what we consider high art. And
yeah.
so we do a little bit. It's a private public partnership with the government. They have been very generous and they have been very accommodating. We've had five. I mean, COVID, we were shut, but it's been pretty amazing for us.
Yeah, yeah, I know that's interesting business model, the private that the government is putting some finance into it as well.
No, they're not putting finance, but what they're
Ah,
doing is they're not putting any finance
okay,
in it, but
okay, sorry.
they're giving space. And real estate in India is, first of all, very expensive,
Yeah, of
and second,
course.
it's something charming about being in a historical location. It's
Absolutely.
like Versailles has done that for so many years.
Yep, yep,
The art program, and I think it's very successful. I
yep.
think that there's a lot of I think when we mix older and newer art, magic happens.
It's absolutely the Versailles. I immediately think of the Anish Kapoor in the
My point.
gardens there. I think of Vasconcelos, the Portuguese artist with her Marie Antoinette pink helicopter. I don't know if you ever saw that. That was wonderful.
I saw some images, but I mean that's what I mean, right? It's memories of a lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Now, Nature has been exhibiting many international, if you like, non-Indian artists recently, and the gallery had a solo show with Berlin-based artist Alicia Quadra. I hope I've pronounced that right. Who may be connected with Pace Gallery in
She
January
is,
in the
yes.
gallery in Delhi. Do you want to say a
And
little bit about that?
yeah, so I have liked Alicia's work for a very, very long time, and as has Peter. And I I do believe that as the Indian audience is now fairly international. And when they have, let's say, $100 to spend, they would like to know what the $100 can get from a world point of view.
Hmm.
So while I would always like my program to remain at 70% Indian and South Asian, I would like 30% to get to be more international, and have artists who speak with our current program to be showcased. Alicia makes a lot of sense for us because, I mean, one is a materiality, second is a focus on time and, science. I mean, I get lost in her work, and I need to be intellectually challenged by an artist, and I find her brain so powerful. I think she's a serious superstar, and I think the world will see her magic as life goes on. But we're showing other artists. We're going to be showing Yepe Hine. We're
Hmm.
showing Matthew Brown this fall. So yes, we are beginning with international artists because I simply believe that we must. It also helps create sort of an osmotic
Yeah.
reverse relationship,
Yeah.
and that really helps.
That's always great. I mean, that's the whole theory of diversity. That's what I believe makes London so amazing, and possibly more amazing than New York. I always feel that London is actually more diverse than New York and more welcoming of strangers. The Venice Biennale, that's got this great theme.
Foreigners everywhere.
Foreigners everywhere, but people don't quite understand. In the UK, that sounds really insulting. I bought one of their tote bags, and it has the Italian Stranieri ovunque on one side. And I always make sure that's showing, because if someone
Otherwise,
sees
someone will
foreigners
get
everywhere,
offended.
sorry.
Otherwise, someone's going to get offended and cancel your
Exactly,
show.
yeah. But it's when you it's like what we were saying about explaining contemporary art. When Pedrosa explains this and that it's connected with the artworks, the neons and everything in every language, it suddenly makes sense, but it wouldn't make sense to the person in the street.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, so you've spoken about introducing India, and I agree that there's an osmosis where then your more local artists also are then exposed to the work of other international artists. And in India, for example, are there the equivalents of, say, Tate Modern, Pompidou, that are deliberately showing artists from all over the world?
So we have our museums, our
Mm,
state museums,
mm.
but now we have a very strong list of private patrons who are opening their museums.
Okay.
Kiran Madar being one of them. KNMA is, I think, going to be the largest repository and will host the largest collection of South Asian art in the world. There's Museum of Art and Photography in Bangalore. There is the Serendipity, the Munja. Many families are coming up with their museums or
Yeah.
are funding museums. So I
And I
think that
know I know that's an established model in South Asia and Southeast Asia, that you have these what we would call foundations. They're private collections, and people open them up so that the public are exposed to them.
no, these people are building institutions for
Yeah.
and
Oh, I
purchasing
see.
for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
So it's
No,
not as
that's
much as their own collections that they're opening up versus building for public.
I understand. I understand. Yeah. I wonder if you could just say, look, I appreciate we're coming to the end of the time now. I wonder if you could just give the listeners an impression of, and they can look online, obviously, we'll put some links in for them. But what is your aesthetic in your gallery spaces? Is it white cube?
Oh, I love that question because I have a different answer now.
Hmm.
So Delhi is a whitish cube with a very industrial feel with concrete floors and shed kind of a converted gallery space. But our Mumbai space, which is designed by a rather famous architect called interior designer called Rajiv Saini, it's a concrete box and it's been intentionally kept as dark, and the floor and the ceiling and the walls are all the same. And I love it because it pushes viewership and it pushes the boundary of where and how art should be kept, shown, and experienced. So i I think our job is to push viewing and to push the mind into other realms. And I think that Rajiv has done it very successfully at my Mumbai space. So yes, my spaces look very different.
Yeah, no, I love that when you go in a contemporary gallery and it isn't a white cube. I quite like that.
Not
Um,
a white cube. Because why replicate what's been done?
Yeah, yeah. I remember Todd Taylor and Virginia Dempster, both of who have been guests on this podcast. They've gone their separate ways in some ways now, but they had this infamous gallery in Soho called Rifle Maker, and they just left it as it was. It was a rifle maker's from dating from the early 18th century, the oldest building in Soho. People didn't realize that. And they just left, even you could still see the bullet marks sometimes, and they just left it with its old Victorian chimney piece, and it was deliberately meant to go against the trend of it must be a white cube.
So some of the most charming spaces in Venice where I saw exhibitions were raw spaces. I love spaces.
Yeah. Yeah, and Andre that was my guest last week. He's an alumnus, and he actually had this 12th century Templar Crusaders oratorio, like a religious space, with wonderful painting cycles, very small and dark, with wonderful painting cycles by Parmigianone, one of the great Venetian painters of the Renaissance. And the work he showed was one of his artists, and it was that wonderful tension between the contemporary artists responding site specifically to this dark Renaissance space. I love it. And Venice, as you say, is filled with those kind of things, and they're free during the Biennale, to go in.
Honestly, through the conversation that I've had with you, the more I think about it, I feel that really what I'm trying to do is understand myself better with our very robust past and so much potentiality. And what is our role in that moment in between? And that's kind of the old and raw spaces, or what has already been there in terms of heritage spaces or the older spaces, and then using that for the new. So really, not looking at destruction looking at destruction towards regeneration.
And it also helps to preserve those old buildings as well.
I think so.
Because there's so many like deconsecrated churches and like old warehouse buildings that just aren't used anymore in Venice, as you know. And just a final question. You were talking before we started recording about your daughter studying this program. Well, and when we started the recording, studying this program in New York, she's beginning to purchase art herself. What advice would you give to like younger generations of potential gallerists? What advice would you give them, and what might that hold in store maybe for the future of Indian, younger people who might want to start opening galleries in India? What advice would you give?
A lot of space. I think more people should come into the industry and work towards building it further. I think there is a lot of talent out there that is waiting to be nurtured and presented. So I think we need more galleries. We definitely need more art professionals. And I think that we need to do this together, because I think it's going to take an army to actually make it to that multi-billion dollar size of the art market. And for the young kids, I do think that if they can afford it, then they should study and skill build, because it's not something you sat at home and you thought you wanted to do and you just did it. That's a hard way of doing it. It's one way of doing it. But building skills just helps you leapfrog a lot of pain. It gives you different kinds of pain, but there are ones you can avoid.
It's tremendous. Yeah, I think hopefully people are listening to this will take that advice. It's wonderful advice. So we could carry on talking for a long time, Aparajita, but I just want, on behalf of all the listeners and viewers, I just want to thank you for giving up your time today, because NATURE MORTE, I've got alumni working in India now, and they speak very, very highly of your galleries, and also I think also of your personal input into spreading the art world. So thank you very much, Aparajita, for being the guest today.
Thank you so much, David, for having me on it.